Hello, everyone. This is Stephanie Boozer with CUGC HQ, and I'm excited to welcome you to our second webinar this week. We have a user share today talking all about how to maintain security and a good user experience. And I know that is on a lot of your minds as you have a big remote workforce you may be supporting. With everything that's going on. But before we dive in, just have a couple of things for you. First of all, just want to remind you that we do have our CUGC virtual events still going on. So definitely check those out. We've got 2 today. Houston and our Utah group go today. And we're also starting back up our Excel events. And our Excels are full day events. They're packed with speakers. Great chance to network and you can win prizes. The next one is the UK group. They're going next week on the 16th. So I just put a link in the chat for you to our events calendar. You can access everything there. You can get to all these CUGC to go events and to the Excel events. So be sure to check it out, and also our upcoming webinars as well. All right, I also want to let you know that we are recording today's presentation. So if you have to pop out for a little bit, don't worry, you'll get a link to the recording tomorrow. That's going to come to you in an email from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. Also want you to submit your questions as you have them. I think we're going to probably save them for the end, but we'll see how that goes. But definitely type them in as you have them, and we'll try to get to as many as we can today. And finally, I will have a survey for you guys, a link in the chat for that at the end. So just stay tuned. It's short, anonymous, and for CUGC use only. Okay, so I am about to place you into very good hands. We have Dave Brett and James Rankin. They are both CTPs. They are both highly involved in the community and great supporters of CUGC. And I think I'm going to just turn things over to them. I know you've probably seen them on several of our webinars in the past if you've been to those, or if you've been to the UK group meetings, definitely seen them there. So Dave and James, I am going to hand things over to you guys. And I think, James, I'm sending you the screen.
Yep.
Right now. Let me make sure there's 2 of you in here. Let me make sure I send the right one. Do you see it?
I certainly do. Let's go to show my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Can you see the panel at the side, the GoToWebinar one, or not? That's popped up there.
No.
Right,
you
excellent.
can't.
Just checking, just a minute. Okay, brilliant. Yes, my name is James Rankin, and obviously we've got Dave on as well. If I sound a bit odd, it's because I'm switching between 2 screens because I'm having to use my laptop to present from and my desktop to read my notes because of issues I shall not bore you with right now that basically mean I'm incompetent when it comes to setting up a computer. As I said, I'm James Rankin. I'm a current CTP. I've got my I've just noticed, no, I haven't, sorry, I thought I'd got the Twitter handles the wrong way around there with that, but we've got our Twitter handles listed there and our websites as well. We both do a lot of blogging, I'm sure we have. So Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, so my name's Dave Brett, also CTP, worked with James on a couple of projects around the topic we're presenting today. Like he said, Twitter handles up there. If you've got one thing on the questions, so we are gonna try our best to answer the questions as we go through, but if you do have any, then feel free to chuck them in the question box, and we'll do our best to answer them.
Cool. I think it's worth making the point as well that we're not kind of security specialists by any stretch of the imagination. We're kind of looking at the security and the performance bit from, you know, the regular admin architects or consultants sort of view. So we're looking at things, you know, quick wins that you can get out there that will improve your security posture and, you know, kind of make you more resistant to pen tests and things like that, whilst obviously not locking down the environment to such an extent that you can't use it, which is obviously what we want to try and avoid. And obviously the slides, I know somebody always asks this in the questions, so we will be making, I've just seen Rachel's question there, slides will be available at the end before anybody asks about that. So let's just crack on. We've got a bit of an agenda here. I'm going to mainly talk through like a sort of first part where we talk about the kind of softer side of security processes and things like that. And hopefully that bit won't take too long. We'll try and get through that pretty quickly. And then we'll talk more about the technical stuff, where hopefully we'll be able to give you some takeaways that you can pretty much start using straight away in your environments, obviously subject to the required testing and whatnot. So, I mean, just from a perspective of what we're talking about, you know, we've all spent a long time trying to make our systems really performant, right? You know, make them adaptable to your users to give a good service to the business. And God, my phone's ringing. Excuse me, it's the dentist. Sorry, yeah. So user experience we've been so focused on for a very long time. And I'm as guilty as anybody of actually saying, you know, let's make user experience the most important thing. And really, we kind of shouldn't be doing that. But I mean, it is vitally important, you know, it is vitally important to enterprises. You've also got to remember that as well as our users out there, we've also got admin experience as well. You know, your administrators are users as well. They use systems, they use it to get jobs done and to support the business. So we've got to be very careful. And we've always tried really over the last few years to try and give ourselves the best UX and AX that we have out there. But security recently has pretty much kind of come back on the menu quite a bit. I mean, we've got things like the general data protection regulations. You know, there is now a lot more power for organizations in the UK, like the ICO, to deal with negligence that leads to breaches. If a breach happens, you know, you can lose money through sort of being robbed essentially, but also through things like, you know, negative impact on share prices and damage to your revenue streams, as you've got to do a lot of clearing up afterwards. And also obviously there's reputational damage as well. A company that kind of becomes associated with a security breach, very often, you know, for a long time, people don't want to trust them because they think that their processes are not up to scratch because they've been breached and it's been widely publicized. So security is very much kind of front and center these days. So what you've got to try and do really is, we've kind of got a bit of a pendulum going on, you know, where we swing back between concentrating on performance or concentrating on security. And you know, I remember years and years ago, we used to try and lock down our users so hard. You know, we didn't let them do anything except the very minimum that they needed to do their jobs. And really then we kind of moved a bit more towards like sort of allowing them a bit more freedom to customize their environments and to choose different ways of doing things. And, you know, maybe we went too far down that in that we became a bit lax with regard to security. And as security is becoming more into it, ideally, we've got to try and aim for that happy medium. It's very nuanced. There's no absolute answer to it. We've got to try and provide that best possible user experience, but also make sure that we are absolutely secure. And we've always got people, I mean, code spaces are the ultimate poster boy for bad security, right? Somebody got into their AWS console, I think, as I remember, and basically just deleted their entire business. And that was literally the end of them. And, you know, we've got to adopt a stance that satisfies those requirements, that you're not going to suffer any sort of business damage or reputational damage because of your security posture, but also because, you know, you want to make sure that your users are happy enough that they're not going to leave because you're making it too difficult for them to do their jobs. And as I say, you can kill things off with security overkill. I worked with a client who locked down their access to the Citrix API gateway to such an extent that in Citrix Cloud, they couldn't use MCS to provision their workers. The security standpoint really, you know, told against them. I think, Dave, you've seen, you know, examples of ADCs where they've locked them down and left them pretty much useless as well.
Yes, I have. On many occasions, people go so far down the road and they're trying to lock everything out and they end up blocking themselves to be able to get into them, and from that point on, without access to the management console, it's pretty much a rip out and rebuild, or a restore at least.
Excellent. So yeah, we've got to try and strike that sort of balance. The other thing to talk about that there's a lot about at the minute is what people call zero trust environments. And I remember a guy called Ed Crowley saying quite sort of pointedly that there aren't technological solutions to behavioral problems. But today, this really doesn't sort of kind of stack up, because with a zero trust environment, and especially with the likes of GDPR out there, you can't just say, you know, it's HR's problem that people are hacking us or attacking us because we've hired the wrong people, right? We are now ultimately responsible for all of our users and how they behave. And breaches are more or less inevitable, right? You can secure something as much as you want, but you'll never ever stop a truly determined attacker. So zero trust computing means that no device, which is external or internal, or no user who is an administrator or a standard user is trusted by default. You've always got to verify, you've got to run with the least privilege. And this is something that a stance that a lot of enterprises are now adopting. So it's something that we've got to factor in. And what's particularly interesting is trying to manage administrators when you consider they could potentially be compromised. And this sort of thing means that detection and response, logging and auditing and all those things is the most key part of all of this, right? You should never, ever scrimp on the auditing. Don't compromise on it, because it's when a breach is going to happen, not if. And when it does happen, you've got to be able to go through there. You've got to be able to alert, you've got to find out that an attack or a compromise is going on. You've got to respond, and you've got to be able to trace the scope of what's happened within that attack. So I can't stress this enough. With regards to detection and response, auditing is absolutely vital. You cannot compromise on it at all.
I'll just jump in there, James, and just say a quick point on that. Something that isn't enough is auditing locally. So in the event that you have been compromised and you have a malicious person or device like trawling around your network, the amount of data that entity is going to produce is potentially going to be huge. And if you don't have the right settings for like log rollover and offloading them, you could well find that by the time you get to dig in and have a little look at what's actually going on, those logs would have rolled off. So there's a mention up there of like a scene management system or something like that to take in all that data and keep it in a secure central place. That is massively important.
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of stuff recently with Splunk, which obviously if you've got Splunk is great. You can, the security guys literally just suck in all the Windows event logs from Splunk and keep it all up there. And that's great for us as admins because it's handed off to them. And it was quite funny. They said, right, you'll never hear from us again, or if you do, something's gone wrong and we're looking to trace it back out. So yeah, I totally agree with that as well. So obviously when you're going to do all this auditing, you also need to monitor very heavily. And an important part of this, obviously, when we're balancing security against performance, is we've got to understand baselines and the impact of everything that we do. There's always, when you talk about monitoring, people say, should you use an agent-based monitor or an agentless monitor? Usual answer is it depends. If you do use agents, use ones that are proven on Citrix virtual platforms. I've worked with things before. I'm not going to mention any names, but some of them aren't particularly great when it comes down to it. They'll make a big impact on performance that can impact your users quite badly. Always use the recommended configuration and exclusions and things like that. What I've seen at a lot of places as well is what I call agent overkill. They load like 5, 6 different things on a device. I know one place has got Semantic DLP, Tanium, Cisco AMP. A lot of them are doing the same sort of things, and they're all having an impact on performance. So try and be easy on the amount of agents you get on there. Monitoring tools that you can use, some of my personal favorites: Uber Agent, EG Innovations, Control Up, Goliath. There's loads more in that space. Get a good one in there that works for you, and make sure that you are, as we say, taking baselines when you start out, on a project. Every time you implement a change, especially a security related change, then re-verify using those tools after you retest. So for instance, you might build an image, take a baseline of all your key performance indicators, and then somebody comes along and puts on something like Cisco AMP. You need to check straight away, do my applications launch in the same time? Does my logon take the same time? What's the session performance like? How long does it take to synchronize a mailbox? All those things, because that's the only way you're going to understand if you're having a performance impact on the environment. You don't want your users to be telling you there's a performance impact, because generally it's too late by the time you reach that stage. You've already had the negative effect. Right, that's enough of the soft stuff. So let's just try and get a bit deeper into the techie stuff that we have here. Now, another bit that's really, really important is understanding your user journey. I always talk about this. Now, I had a case recently where I had a bunch of users that said to me, when I asked them how they do their jobs, they said, oh, we use a Citrix desktop. We use Citrix and we use SQL Server Management Studio, Outlook, and Skype, and that's it. And this diagram on the left-hand side here, that's kind of how I imagined they worked. You know, they just came on, logged onto a Zen app server, and ran those 3 apps. However, the diagram down to the bottom right there shows what it actually looked like when I discovered they were logging onto a Zen app server, a version 7 as I remember. From there, they were RDPing across to basically just a Windows 7 VM sat in a data center somewhere, which from there they then used to log onto another farm, an older farm, a Zen app 6.5 farm, and it's from there that they ran Skype and Outlook. And also from that, they were then RDPing to a different jump box to get through a different firewall configuration to run SQL Server Management Studio and connect to a particular database. Now, I know this is a bit of an extreme example, but understanding how those users work is key to just about every single part of what we're going to talk about in this. So you need to understand, I mean, also in this, you can say that where security holes would be, for instance, the Windows 7 machine wasn't patched very well. They could run command prompts, they could RDP to systems that they weren't supposed to get to and things like that. They could launch PowerShell from certain points. So the amount of pivot points that let an attacker get a foothold in the network there. But what I'm trying to say is it's imperative that you use monitoring and use your knowledge of, you know, going and talking to the users and understanding to work out how they're doing their jobs, because it's so vitally important to understand that user journey for lots of the things that we're going to talk about here.
So moving into some of the methods that the security teams or the security pen testers will certainly use to try and compromise your system. One of the first ones I'm going to talk about is lateral movement. So this is generally what happens when an attacker gains a foothold into your network. So normally they'll try and get into your network using either brute force or a 0-day, or they'll use password playing to get into your network. Once that user account is compromised, then the next thing they'll do is they'll try and elevate their rights. And as soon as that happens, then they will try and laterally move around your network. The issue is, how many times have you heard just add the user to the Citrix admins group? From an EUC perspective, that is a big no-no in my view. And the reason for that is, say somebody got into your network somewhere else, then they got added to they added their account to the Citrix admins group. Then if that group is an administrator of your entire platform, they can then laterally move around any part of your Citrix infrastructure, be that licensing or storefront, or even get onto, you know, if you use the same group for your hypervisor administrators or your provisioning services, anything like that, then they can then move around. So you need to consider this when you're designing and fitting your security groups into your platform. Don't just have a single group with full access to everything. Try and split it out. James, if you click.
Yep.
One of the good options around that is having a strong OU structure for your Citrix, not only your infrastructure but your workers, and minimizing the administrator rights on those services. So for example, if you look up there, you've got the CVAD controllers or cloud connectors. In that case, you would maybe create an admin group for that service and enforce that admin group at that OU level. One of the things you'll notice here is domain administrators are not in the local administrators group for that server. And there's a good reason for this. Is if you're generally in an enterprise, you look after your little piece of a bigger puzzle. And what I've seen is you can't be responsible for every single system in the enterprise. And if an attacker gets into your network somewhere else and manages to get into that domain administrators group, then they can laterally move around and move into your environment. And if you leave that in there, then they instantly get administrator rights to your whole platform. So you can remove that group and lock it down a lot tighter to individual components. So just because you're I don't know, a Citrix licensing admin doesn't mean you can then move onto a controller and have those same rights. Another thing is those groups, if you can, and if you have the ability in place, then make them change audited groups. So put a process and security around how you get put into and removed from those groups. So a user can't just come along and put themselves in the group, or if they do, then the right people are alerted, and you know who has access to what parts of your platform.
Right, so another thing that is really a pretty good quick win is, turning on of multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication. I think it's very important that now, we are trying to make users find it kind of like second nature, really, to use MFA and, make it a part of their logon process. I know when I first started using it, when I'm logging onto Citrix Cloud in the morning, it was kind of like, oh, I've got to get my phone out and type in a code and respond to a code. But now it feels completely natural to me. It's much better that now we get the, you can just click on the tap on the phone screen to respond to a prompt rather than having to go in and get a code from the authenticator app or whatever it is. So try and make your MFA user friendly to keep that performance perspective there. But make it second nature to the users, get them to embrace it. You can have it working at lots of different levels, but don't go overboard on it. I've seen people, go too far with it, having people have to use it every 5 minutes, when they're opening Office apps and silly things like that. But we're going to talk about a bit later on also about privileged access workstations. You can apply multiple levels of MFA there because they're higher value targets. And another point to make about MFA that I know I've been burned with myself is make sure you've got redundancy in it. We had Microsoft authentication services went down a couple of times last year and literally nobody could log into our platform. So it's very important to also have maybe a break glass admin account to be used in an emergency that doesn't have MFA attached to it, but obviously that you can audit on to make sure people aren't using it for the wrong purposes.
Right, PowerShell. Now, this is one of the first places any pen tester will go when they get into your system. They'll try and get into it, then they'll try and use what PowerShell has built in to exploit your platform. It's incredible at what it does. It makes admins' lives a lot easier. I know I use it almost every day. I know, looking through the attendee list of this webinar, there's a lot of people on here that also use it every day. The problem is if you don't secure it and your users get it, or an attacker gets it and they have any form of elevated rights, then they can wreak havoc in your network, and they can do that pretty quickly. If you look at some of the things that we're going to talk about today, so
Flipped it on for you.
That's right. The first thing we'll talk through is patch and upgrade. So by default, a lot of the 2012 machines will have PowerShell version 2 on there. Microsoft release patches and upgrades for PowerShell often. Make sure you upgrade. One of the reasons, and one of the main reasons not to use the V2 is it has no auditing capability, which is a huge plus in the later versions. There's a command up there that you can disable the inbuilt version of PowerShell on the VDAs and your infrastructure servers. It says that they'll optionally also run that as a shutdown script. So that means every time you reboot or shut down the machine, it gets disabled for you. James and I had some issues around getting rid of PowerShell 2 on some of the older builds, namely 2008 and Windows 7. There are some registry keys which you can delete, which will disable the PowerShell version 2 engine. If you want to check,
you're in the notes when you get the slides.
yes,
So
you can check which version, just running that PS version table. Secure execution rights. So this is basically being able to secure and know who can run PowerShell in your environment. So on here, you want to make sure you cover both versions of PowerShell. Make sure you do PowerShell and the ISE and any program you have on your platform that runs a PowerShell possibly integrated terminal like VS Code or something like that. You can do it a number of ways. So you can use app locker policies. FS Logic's app masking, James and I were discussing earlier, is another good way. You can block PowerShell for anyone but administrators. This is important that if an attacker gets into your system and manages to get into or break into your local drives, which we'll talk about a bit later on, then this will give you the ability, even if they do see that executable, to stop them actually getting into it. Understanding the usage is just, this is part of the user journey. So there are many cases where PowerShell needs to be executed, such as logon scripts and various other like app launch scripts that you may have. You can allow these to be run as a script, but tie that in with auditing, so you know. The middle one at the bottom is enable PS auditing. So make sure you're up v5.1 and up, and you can turn on all the available auditing within GPO and send them to either a SIEM server or a central storage location. So any PowerShell command that's run on any of your servers on your platform, you've got that logged, you've got who did it, where they were running it from, and if you need to, you can then go back and track what happened. Script execution policies is a simple GPO setting. You can set that to allow everything or allow only signed scripts. Make sure if you do allow only signed scripts, then you properly sign the scripts that you develop in-house. Otherwise, they won't be allowed to run. And the last one up here is enable constrained language mode. Now, this is something that most pen testers I've come across will tell you to enable. Just be careful. All it is an environment variable that you put on, and it will lock the PowerShell language mode down. And what it will effectively do, it will stop you running any native .NET calls within the PowerShell environment. The problem with that is there's a whole load of stuff that relies on .NET calls in PowerShell to work. So just be aware, you may want that on your VDAs. I wouldn't recommend putting it directly on the master image because it will stop certain image sealing processes happening properly and bits and bobs like that. So by all means use it, but just make sure you test that before you push that out. And that is a per machine setting.
Yeah, I actually went kind of to test with this in a Citrix environment recently, and you're right, anything that's being run remotely on your VDAs, maybe from like an admin area, is okay if you've got constrained mode on the VDAs, but not on that admin server. But what we had a script running as a startup script that basically told it which FS Logic share to point to for the profiles, and that just stopped working instantly because of constrained language mode. So anything that you've got executing on the VDA level, at that machine level, you have to be very careful with, as I say. I think it's also worth mentioning as well that constrained mode, if you configure the app blocker scripts rules, it'll configure constrained mode for non-admins only, which may be an interesting halfway house, you know, if you're looking to allow your admins to get away with it, but not your standard users.
Mm-hmm. Also, so one last point on this: if you are a Splunk customer and you do have that PS auditing, you can something that I've built out for a couple of people is tracking every PowerShell command that's run across the entire EUC estate, and then you can centralize that into a count on Splunk. And generally, a lot of people, if you block PowerShell, that should be like close to 0 the whole time. And if you see that starting to ramp up, then you know something's going on out there on your platform, and you can start to look at what's going on and maybe get ahead of any attack that's underway.
I shall be in touch about that then, because I was just thinking that myself about auditing it into Splunk.
It's very useful.
Cool. Right, in Citrix environments as well, we obviously have, you know, that old chestnut of stopping DLP by securing like sort of clipboard, and whether people can kind of cut and paste into sessions. Now, the clipboard redirection used to just be on or off basically before version 7. From version 7.0 to 7.5, you had read-only, which kind of allowed you to disable session-to-client redirection. But from 7.6 onwards, we've got much more granular control of the clipboard policies. You can turn off either direction. So if you look at that diagram I've got to the top left there, it shows you how to mix and match the policies. So the numbers refer to the policies that you'll need to configure to get it working. The yellow is referring to restricted, so you can only allow certain file types to be cut and pasted. The file type formats are a little bit confusing, but if you just want to restrict it to text only, for instance, and no images and things like that, then you can do it like that. So you could have it one way and only allowing text one way, so you can really mix it up. If you've got a VDA of 1903 plus and also a fairly recent workspace app, you can now actually do proper cutting and pasting of a file from your session into or out of it, like you have been able to do in RDP for years. But you can also format control that as well using the format CFX_file. So I would suggest, at a minimum, the two ones I've got called out there in that diagram, blocking it in one direction so users can only paste into the session rather than taking data back out, or they can only paste certain file types into the session and they can't pull data back out. Those are the two commonest ways that I think would also satisfy a lot of your security issues around that. You've also got things that you think of, can people print and things like that? Can people scan things? So again, use Citrix policies to lock those down and improve your sort of DLP stance around that.
And just finally on that, if you do run Citrix ADC over and above your EUC platform, then you've got some options around smart access and smart control. And this can also control the clipboard channels as well as others. So you can either use smart control, which is on the ADC itself, and base a ICA access profile on the output of an EPA scan. So if you pass an EPA scan, then you can open up some channels and disable others, and by default just keep everything locked out. Or if you have smart access, then you can hand those smart access policies back into the Citrix policy engine and do a lot more granular control based on the endpoint and what session profile they're using and what gateway they're coming in from. It's definitely worth looking at if you do provide these apps both internally and externally, because this is another one that a pen tester will go after. If they can get to your apps, and most people have Notepad open, and then they can start browsing around the local file system, open some files up in Notepad, Control-A, Control-C, and then paste it to their local machine, then instantly you have a breach of private data.
Actually, another quick point I think I should make is that the HTML5 receiver, by default, one of our pen testers found out, can actually download files to your local machine. So there is a policy to turn that off, but I forgot to put it in the session here, but I was quite surprised by that because I didn't know the functionality was there. So another one to be aware of, get that turned off as well, and you'll get ahead of your pen testers.
Okay, moving on, local drive access. This is something that's been around for a while. Whenever you're running more so on the server-based workloads, you want to be hiding the local drives of the server. You don't want your end users rooting around and sort of seeing what they can find and dig out on your VDAs. There are loads of things you need to consider here. This was something that took quite a while to get dealt with properly. So the first thing to deal with is like your standard drive lockdown. So this will be a regular GPO setting. You can hide the drives, hide access to the drives, and then hide them and then restrict access to them. You can see the GPO settings up there. You can apply that to the user at logon. And then when they browse, they'll try and go to the C or the D drive and it will say access denied. All pretty good.
I think it's very important as well to say that, we should be encouraging users to save data to somewhere like OneDrive or ShareFile or a redirected area, because then as part of their workflow, they don't need to go into the C drive. And also, if you've got applications that, stupid applications that open up in the C drive, when you go to save and open, try and redirect as many of those as possible and the users won't get frustrated with it.
Mm-hmm. So if you click for the next slide, so you think everything's done, you've locked down your C drive, perfect, and then the pen testers come back, they jump back on your system, open up Notepad again, go File, Open, and then type in //localhost/C$ or //127001/C$. What that does is it will put them to the loopback address, and that will then allow them into your C drive again, and then they can open the files up and do everything that they could before. So you can block this. Effectively, it's using a UNC path, and you can block this by removing the run command from the start menu.
Which is weird.
Which
I
is,
think that does that.
It is strange that that's the reason why, the reason you can block that, or the way you can block that. But the problem is with that is, as soon as you do that, access to all UNC paths stop. So even if they're going to a legitimate file share that they have rights to using the Explorer shell, it will say you can't get to that. So another option is to use App Locker or something equivalent to restrict execution of files from those UNC paths. So you can deny everything from localhost / or 127.0.0.1 /, and then yes, they'll be able to get into it and see it, but when they try and run anything from those loopback, the loopback UNC shares, App Locker will kick in and it will deny them. So moving on, if we look at Chrome, so why am I talking about this with local drive access? So again, you think everything's locked down, it's great, things are going good, and then your pen tester comes in again, uses Chrome Edge or the Chromium Edge render, types in C : in the browser, and then it's got a local file, it's got a file browser built into the Chrome browser, and it will again let you into the C drive. So then you can start browsing around, find what you need, download files, and do whatever you want within the C drive. Chrome and Edge GPO can be used to stop this. You push a GPO out, which will block access to a list of URLs. Something is worth doing. I've found they're a bit tricky, the way that it displays like file and then 3 slashes, or sometimes it's 2. Go and actually browse around in the Chrome browser and then copy the URL direct from Chrome. And then you can block that. So that's all good. So then you move on. Pen tester comes back in again, goes back into Chrome, and then goes / localhost / $C or /admin $. Now the problem with this is, from I think it was 2008 R2, Microsoft changed the way the locally logged on user, the rights they have to the local shares, local admin shares. And by default now, the currently logged on user has read access to any local admin shares. So it used to be, back in the 2003 and 2008 days, that you would try and get to a loopback address or an admin $ share, and it would prompt you for credentials. With R2, this changed. There is a registry fix, which we will send out, which will, you can revert the behavior of the Windows Server or the Windows 10 machine to behave like 2008, only in the aspect of these admin shares. And in that, it will be when you try and browse to it, it will then prompt you for admin credentials. And
Which
then
is
if you've also, yes, it is. But then if you have your App Locker stuff sitting above that to block execution rights, even if they do have an account to get into that admin share to see the local disk, then when they try and run something, that will get blocked. So it's quite a big topic, but it was something that took quite a long time to get right. There are issues with this, which James will dive into now.
Is the OneDrive sync client. Yeah, rather annoyingly, OneDrive is tied to the C drive. You can't even point it to a secondary drive. So if you're using the OneDrive sync client, basically you've got to open up that C drive, or users won't be able to access that folder, which is really annoying. So the kind of way to do it is you can use that remove run command GPO, which will help you restrict access to the C drive, but it will restrict access to UNC paths. However, shortcuts to UNC paths will work. So if you're happy with that way, and you can give the users shortcuts instead of browsing to UNC paths, you can use the OneDrive, but also restrict the C drive. However, I've found it possibly better to just use the OneDrive web client rather than the sync client until Microsoft fix it, because it's not really that far distant from it. You could wait for Microsoft to address the issue, so we could send it to a repass point to kind of take it away from the C drive, but the request's been up for 4 years at the moment. or you can just accept the risk that users will be able to get into the system drive and lock it down with AppBlocker or WEM or something like that instead. I did do a blog post which is referenced there, which kind of suggests, you know, how close you can get to it and builds on Dave's original work there. But yes, OneDrive is the problem child. For instance, Dropbox writes to the C drive as well, but you can send that to a repass point and get around it. So hopefully, you know, it'll get fixed soon. But right at the minute, it is a bit of a fly in the ointment for that side of things. There's also an interesting thing to talk about is timeout settings, because in Citrix environments, these can be particularly difficult to deal with. What I normally recommend is, you know, your web portal or your storefront sort of timeout, set that quite aggressively, you know, make it timeout after 5 minutes. Set your session lock timeout also very aggressively, you know, lock it after 5 minutes, 10 minutes of inactivity. Gotcha to be aware of there is stuff that's server VDI that's been installed with a server VDI switch. Technically, these are console sessions, so they don't actually increment the idle timeout properly. You can use something like set idle time to lock, or you can use, there's a JPO now in security options for machine inactivity limit, which will do that on a device basis. Now, when we talk about understanding the user behavior, you need to understand user behavior really well to define disconnection and idle timeout policies, depending on the users, what they do, what they run. You know, every enterprise could have different ones, but normally I look at disconnect an idle session after 2 hours, log off a disconnected session after 1 hour further. Don't do anything with active sessions unless required, obviously, unless they're admin sessions. I think admin sessions should be considered a much bigger risk, and, you know, your average user wouldn't have an admin session just sat there doing something anyway. They should never be left locked or disconnected or even idle for very long. But I think that kind of 3 hour-ish sort of window maybe covers the user who might disconnect from a session and then go home a couple hours on the train and try and reconnect to it there. But obviously, you've got to test that very, very, very thoroughly to get it right. There's other tools as well that obviously we can block access to that are quick wins that you can get. The command prompt, obviously you can block that via JPO. I have been able to for a very long time. You can also block command script processing as part of that JPO, stop people creating batch scripts on their desktop and running things from there. Got registry editing tools that you can also turn off via JPO. I'd also recommend disabling the remote registry service if you can get away with it. I know there's a few bits of software that still use it, but not that many now, I don't think. You'd also prevent regedit from running silently, so users can't create, for instance, .reg files and things like that, and use that as a bit of a backdoor to get in and edit the registry. Also, some things worth calling out that obviously your red teams, your pen testers will look at is FTP, for instance. FTP, if you open FTP up by creating a shortcut to it, if you put an exclamation mark in front of a command, it will run that as if it's in a command prompt rather than an FTP session. So we can lock FTP out. There's also subs.exe, which we can use to map a network drive to a local path and kind of backdoor into the C drive that way. So what I do is I hide things like subs, FTP, and reg.exe. Actually hide them using FSLogic's apps masking. It does give you a warning. It says, oh my God, you're hiding a system file. But as long as you understand your user journey and you know that they're not going to need to use the likes of FTP or subs or reg or something like that, then you can literally just hide them completely from the users, and, you know, they'll never be able to run them at all. And I think it's quite a cool way of doing it. We've also got bits, browser, particularly Chrome, which I've talked about specifically Chrome as a browser now. Browser is one of the few areas you can improve security and performance at the same time. A great sort of example of this is an ad blocker. Ad blockers like uBlock Origin in Chrome, right? They increase your security because they protect you from all sorts of crap and horrible CDNs and third-party advertisers on the internet. But they also increase your performance because you're not rendering videos and interstitial windows and pop unders and pop overs. So ad blocker, excellent way of basically enabling better performance and better security. Look into things like Chrome and turn off unneeded features like Software Reporter and Chrome Remote Desktop. Why do you need anything like that? They're just more backdoors. Java, again, another massive security hole that people are going to go after. Use FSLogix to manage your Java versions, especially if they're downstream ones. And another handy add-on that I've identified, HTTPS everywhere. I load that as from a JPO, and it makes sure that all of your websites are properly secured where possible. So again, browser, is another big attack vector that you'll get exposed to, but it's also something where you can improve the performance level as well. We've also got stuff on the start menu. Both myself and Dave, when we worked on a project together, we actually locked down the start menu using FSLogic's app masking. So basically all the shortcuts came from the program data folder, the common start menu folder, and we just hid those shortcuts or revealed them using FSLogic's. So stuff that the user didn't need to get into didn't appear on the start menu. So if we'd overlooked anything, they couldn't dig it up by, browsing through the start menu and looking for the shortcuts. It's also worth calling out that the WinX menu, the right click menu, has things on there like command prompt and things like that, and event viewer that you might want to hide from your users. There's an article linked down there about customizing the WinX menu because you've got to do some sort of hashing on it and things like that. So you can change that as well to hide things you don't want in there. Another thing that came out of our pen testing is what's called binary planting. So if you've got something that's installed in a non-standard folder, a malicious user can drop an executable out in there and get it loaded by, when the path variable is called. So the essential thing that you need to do is make sure that everything on your image is installed in the proper folders, the program files folders, the program data folder, or the Windows system folder. There's an example there where we've got Puppet was actually found to be installed in a non-standard folder, which was actually done in the AWS AMI, which was rather annoying. And you could drop a suspicious DLL or file in there and get it loaded in there as well. So another thing to have a look at, as I said, is binary planting. Talked briefly about privileged access workstations earlier, especially when we're talking about things like PowerShell scripts, right? So the idea is that your admins, and again, this is about understanding the user journey. If you've ever used jump boxes, you'll kind of, be familiar with, the concept of having like an admin-y place to do things from. But the idea is that these admin workstations are the places your admins go to do things like run PowerShell scripts in full language mode and things like that. In environments I've worked in, these workstations are the only ones specifically allowed to access session hosts and infrastructure servers via RDP. A lot of them, get them running Windows 10, which has got device guard and credential guard. Some of the high value ones that I've seen have extensive use of MFA on them. So for instance, they log on and when they come to log on to this workstation, they get endpoint MFA presented to them. So they have to present a code from their mobile phone or respond on a mobile phone. But also when they then elevate within that session, they had a YubiKey for elevation as well. I know this is kind of like going down a bit of making your admins work a bit harder, but that's why I said, you need to get them used to this idea of doing their normal stuff on their normal workstation and their privileged things on what's called a privileged access workstation. Obviously on these high value targets, make the auditing much stronger, and you can use things like CyberArk to increase security further, as long as your users don't do things like checking passwords out of CyberArk and putting them in text files on their desktop and cutting and pasting them, which I know I've seen some people do as well. But privileged access workstations, we've got a useful link slide towards the end of the presentation. Some great reading from Microsoft on privileged access workstations. Some people use VMs running within other VMs and within desktops to run as privileged access workstations. Great sort of security habit to be in, and it'll make your job much easier when it comes to spotting unauthorized admins or admins that have been potentially compromised. Is that one of yours, Dave?
Yeah. So just before I move on to the infrastructure stuff, I've got Shane Kleinart smashing my WhatsApp to pieces at the minute. He just around those privileged access workstations, we've just done some work with a pure cloud build, and rather than building admin workstations up in the cloud, he was saying, and we are using, there's a Bastion host and a Bastion network in Azure, which will allow you to jump to any of your machines without having to expose a privileged access workstation up in the cloud to get into your Azure subscription. So it's worth looking at that.
Yeah, that's cool.
As well. Very good, actually, I must say. So Citrix Infrastructure, we've been talking around the VDAs currently and about how to secure them, how to make sure everything's good on there where your end users are, but they do also interact with infrastructure, and there is a whole bunch of stuff to do around that, as well as just the VDAs. If you consider like a simple Citrix deployment and talk through what you would need to secure, you've got for example, licensing servers, storefront, director, controllers, possibly an ADC, SQL servers. This is possibly another kettle of fish and something that you can gladly send your DBA's way. But there is a lot to consider when building your infrastructure. If you just click, James.
Sorry, Matt, I was checking out the questions pen.
And one more. Right, so the one thing Citrix have done and done a very good job at is all of the infrastructure components. If you look through the docs, there is security best practice guides that you can follow. Some of the examples up here, so for a storefront build, it will tell you what extensions you can use, what verbs you can allow, and all of these are published and validated by Citrix. So you know that you can follow these guides, whether it be for an ADC or your controllers or like securing ICA or your storefront servers, and you know that the product's going to work the other end of it, and you've got a validated Citrix secure build, at least to the level that they take it, which is a good starting point. And there's no detriment to you doing it, because it's come from them, so you know it's not going to break the product. So it's definitely worth looking at doing.
Cool. Another one that came out of one of my red teams bits was Windows Remote Management Settings, which I kind of hadn't considered, and I've got a description there of what Windows Remote Management is and the implementation of the protocol that it's based on. But it's basically something that they called out that needed to be locked down. Now, what I did find with this when we talk about balancing security with usability is Windows Remote Management is often used for a lot of admin kind of tools, particularly stuff that was used by the help desk. So we had to make sure that that was, configured in a way that would allow them to continue using that. But as I say, there's a bunch of settings that I've recommended setting here through GPO. If you wanted to satisfy your security teams, this would be the best way to do it. Now, I remember when we talked about PowerShell version 2 before and potentially an admin re-enabling PowerShell version 2, and that's why we had it being disabled again as part of the shutdown script. Also with Windows Remote Management, if you turn off the allow remote shell access, if you set that to disabled, that policy actually stops an admin from being able to install features on a server that they're logged onto. So if an admin in that case tried to turn on PowerShell version 2, that policy would stop them, and then the admin would have to then dig through the registry, which obviously would be blocked because you're blocking the registry editing tools, and then turn that GPO back off somehow, and then be able to enable PowerShell version 2. So the kind of point I'm trying to make is all of these things help build up this kind of defense in depth strategy that even if you've got a compromised admin, they slow them down, yeah? They make them jump through more and more hoops in order to try and get to that sort of attack point that they want to be at. And this is where, the more you slow them down, the more chance you've got of detecting them and finding out that some anomalous behavior is going on. So I think that's a good kind of point to make around the WinRM policies, that they can be helpful in that respect. I know we're getting quite close to the top of the hour now, so I'll probably fire through these quite quickly. Securing local accounts, again, often pulled out by pen testers. Deploy LAPS if you can, the local administrator password solution, which instead of having an admin account on every machine, a local admin that has the same password, it then randomizes that and stores it in AD. Also, in Citrix environments, why would you be caching any logon credentials? I was working with a Citrix environment where they were caching 5 sets of credentials. Why give any, it's an online only environment. Generally, you need connectivity to work in it. So don't cache credentials on there. So set that via GPO. Also, pen testing teams called out to me saying, local copies of admin profiles can be attacked and exploited, apparently. So I wrote an article recently about how to force particular groups of users to have their profiles deleted when they log off a machine. So you could use that to, if an admin logs onto a session host, when they log off, their profile is deleted. Obviously on the privileged access workstation, they could maintain their profile on there because they're a higher value target and subject to more auditing. There's also unmanaged devices that we've had with COVID-19 stuff, which are an interesting case because it's very difficult to really secure unmanaged devices, particularly if the user is an admin. But you can slow them down a bit and make them jump through a few more hoops. Obviously, Dave's already mentioned NetScaler EPA can do some form of checking on there. You've also got Citrix's app protection service, which means that, you know, it gives you some proof against screen scrapers and keyloggers and things like that. Needs 1912 versions and restricts your users to using protected resources. Annoyingly, it's not available in Citrix Cloud yet, but it is on the roadmap. You've also got things like Secure Browser, where you could probably use that to secure some web kind of apps as well. Control panel and settings, just thought I'd mention those. You know, there are things you might not want the users to get into, so you can use GPOs to lock those down. You're probably all pretty familiar with those already. And Sys Policy, Dave, this is one of your favorite subjects, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So CIS, what is it? It's the Center for Internet Security. Now, there's two ways of getting the settings for this. You can download a PDF and do it yourself. It's a, I think it's an 800 or 900 page PDF document with GPO settings in, which I have the pleasure of having done, and it takes ages. The problem is, if you do that, then it won't be officially sanctioned as a CIS implementation. What it is, it's a group of people that define internet security standards for a whole load of different infrastructure components, be that SQL or Windows Server, domain controllers. They do application settings like Outlook settings, Chrome settings, and you can download, once you subscribe, you can download the group policies and implement them in your environment. If you click James.
Yeah, sorry, man, I'm in the questions pane again.
And one more, right. Excellent. So the way it works, you have there you go. So the way it works, you download the CIS level GPOs. So up on the screen there on the left, you have the CIS member server level 1 GPO. And what that is a group policy that CIS send you, and you put it in as is into your environment. And then you can put level 2 above that, or level 3, or however you want to do it. And then the way that you define settings outside of CIS is you create a custom preference and a custom policy that sit over and above the CIS standards to unpick or define settings they have. So the idea of this is that you have a good control of internet security, and more importantly, you've got every single setting that you need to reverse from a CIS standard. You get it agreed with your security team. There is either risk acceptance around it or a documented procedure as why you've had to unpick that, and then it's right there in those custom policies that you define for your organization. The good thing about this is if CIS bring out a like version 3 or a version 4 of the level 1, you can just swap out your base level group policy, and then all your customizations and unpicking will still be allowed, or sorry, implemented further up the GPO hierarchy. It is a minefield. They're huge policies, and there's a lot that can go wrong. But it's definitely something I'm seeing more and more. Organizations are wanting this CIS security put in, and there are products out there like Tenable and that will scan against CIS standards and tell you where you're missing those settings.
Cool. I think we're getting near to the end now. So fortunately, I've just checked the questions out and there isn't really an awful lot in there. So we've done quite well on that. But the key sorts of bits that we've kind of made the impression. I mean, and not much of these are kind of Citrix-y specific things, but you know, we've monitoring and baselining is so important. You can't balance security against usability without understanding those KPIs, right? And you also can't judge what you're going to break when you lock something down unless you understand that user journey. That's absolutely vital. But you know, there's lots of things in there, lots of low-hanging fruit you can go after. Things we talk about like local drive access, PowerShell, command prompts, ad blocking, you know, MFA, local account security. They're all quick wins and they're all things that you'll tick off, you know, when a pen test comes to be done. Things like zero trust environments and privileged access workstations, really worth, you know, adopting that, because these are becoming more and more security kind of standards, really. do all of that securing of your infrastructure components that Dave taught you through to make sure you get that separation of duty and separation of privileges that helps you out there. Auditing, and doing that detection, doing that response, and retaining those logs is vitally important, because if you don't have that track back, if you can't do that forensic sort of run through of things, then you're going to fall foul of GDPR anyway. So, you need to make sure that's done. It's probably the most important bit out of it. And when you get the slides, there's a few interesting links there, including mine and Dave's blogs about things that we've talked about there, and hopefully some interesting reading in there. So I think that's just about it. There's only Rachel asking questions by the looks of things, so we should be good for that. And she completely threw me off with that comment about my son's diarrhea earlier on. Thanks for that, Rachel.
Werther's Originals.
It was, yes. Don't eat sugar-free Werther's Originals. That's another great piece of advice I can give you from my own poor son's experience of the last couple of days. So I think, Stephanie, that's about us done, I think.
All right. Awesome. Well, don't leave just yet, everybody. I do have a trivia question for you. I have 5 t-shirts to give away. Hold on, let me grab back the screen. Okay, so the first 5 people in the chat with the right answer to this question get a shirt. And you can just type the letter. Okay, I got 1.
Hey, they were paying attention. Oh, they already knew.
Let's see. Oh, goodness. Okay, wow. The first 1, 2, 3, 4. I got the first 4. I just need 1 more person.
There you go.
So Brian, Joseph, Ron, and this says Wayne John, but I think it's probably reverse.
And the next one, Jared, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, let me get, where'd my mouse go? Okay. Yep, and Jared. Okay, so awesome, guys. Yep, so the correct answer, get back over to PowerPoint, is, whoa, nope, didn't want to do it. Hold, please. Okay, no, it's still not doing it. It is B. There you go.
It's done it now.
Yay, technology. All right, awesome. All you guys that want a shirt, I will get in touch with you after the webinar to get your sizes and where they need to go. So I'll reach out to you afterwards. And then finally, just a reminder, like I always do at the end of our webinars, just to check us out at mycugc.org if you haven't been there in a while. We have lots of blogs and forums, places for you to get information, ask questions. Maybe you can answer a question for someone. It's a great community. Find your local group, find your next virtual local meeting, and just check out what we have for you. And also be sure to follow us on Twitter. That's where you find the most up-to-date information about everything that's going on. And with that, I'm going to let everyone get back to their day. I hope you all stay safe and healthy and happy, and we hope to see you on another webinar with MyCUGC or at one of our virtual events again soon. Thanks, Dave and James. Appreciate you being here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.